I'm a Ranch Project, and my lovely co-host Leah Shaper will be joining us any moment now, I would imagine.
I'm here.
We almost didn't hit the record button right there.
Yes. I think I might have turned it off and then started it again. Are you still recording on your end?
It says you are, so you probably stole it from me.
Sorry about that.
Well, today we're going to have a fantastic episode on the Yuga cycle, which, if you simply Google it, is a cyclic age in Hindu cosmology. And the idea is that the Hindus were watching the night sky for very long periods of time to come up with this system. And it would also allude to the fact that people for hundreds of thousands of years have been studying the heavens, which is mind-blowing because according to our own historians, like language began 4,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, which is funny too, because I was just looking at the Vedic cultures typically are cited as beginning like around 1500 BC, maybe 2000 BC at the earliest. But some Sanskrit scholars have turned around and said, no, that's impossible. Like the oldest Rig Veda is like 6000 BC. So it's interesting because it's like obviously the 1500 BC would go along with the typical narrative about when language started. And so these scholars are like, there's no way. And we had these written records thousands of years ago before that.
So how do you write things down before language? That's my question.
Well, that's what I'm saying is that that would suggest that language started far earlier than what the typical narrative suggests.
So since the discovery of the Yugas, probably thousands of years ago by other cultures, they've been reused by other cultures, including the Greeks, which had a term called the Great Year. And all they simply did was they learned about the research in the Yuga and they made it their own. And the Greeks came up with things like the Bronze Age, the Golden Age, the Silver Age, which I learned about in grade school. Did you learn about those?
Yeah. Yeah, well, so and then I studied Latin for 8 years, so I spent a great deal of time, looking at Greek and Roman history and mythology and philosophy.
Well, my point being is that almost everyone that's our age has been exposed to this in one way or another if they went to school.
Yeah. Certainly now, far more interesting to look at how the Yuga cycle may certainly have come before the golden age, the great year idea.
Yeah, the Greeks in fact took it from the Hindus. They learned about their Yuga cycle and they made it their own. That makes sense, right?
Yeah, I just don't know that we know that for sure. That's all.
Well, what we do know is that in the last several decades, people have been looking into this, and it seems as if the Yuga cycle is one group of people's interpretation of a cosmic tempo that is happening in our solar system. And it appears to be based on sacred geometry and this cycle. Now, the cycle probably corresponds to something that we refer to as the precession of the equinoxes. But the way the precession was described by Milankovitch is not necessarily what's going on here. And when you dive into the dates, your mind is going to be destroyed because you're not going to find any corroborating information from one place to the other. There are some areas that talk about yugas in millions of years. There are other places that are, and all the numbers are different. The original numbers from the Hindu philosophy puts a yuga cycle at somewhere like 4.3 million years. Now there's really no, go ahead.
Well, so it's interesting because there is explanation about this from Swami Yukteswar Giri, who wrote this volume called The Holy Science. And basically what he describes is that at a certain point in history, a certain leader in India basically changed the dates and the length of time because there was an issue of whether or not he was going to be in the Kali Yuga. So the distinction that's made is that in the original text, it will say something like half the Yuga cycle is 12,000 divine years, but then that is equated to 4.3 million roughly solar years. And so there's an interpretive argument in the original text about what those years really mean. Now, Yukteswar here says that no, this interpretation where we're talking about 4.3 million solar years is totally incorrect. That's a misinterpretation, and it's based on historical and political bias. And so the correct number for the entire Yuga cycle is actually 24,000 years.
Which corresponds closely to the 25,600 year precession of the equinoxes that we look at today.
Yeah.
So people then assume that we're looking at a cosmological cycle that's repeating on Earth. And the more data we get in, it's obvious that it's this precession of the equinoxes, which is about 26,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
But again, there's the discrepancy in numbers, 24,000, 26,000. The reality is that the Milankovitch cycle that's called precession of the equinoxes has in fact been changing over the last 500 million years.
Yeah.
It's slowing down the so-called wobble of the Earth. So there has been change through geologic time of the precession, but just in the factor of a few hundred, maybe 1,000 years.
Yeah, but also something else that's interesting is that it may be that the way precession is being defined is different between Western astronomy and the Vedic philosophy. So, for example, Yukteswar describes, this is what he writes, the sun with its planets and their moons takes some star for its dual. So that's interesting because he's talking about a dual star system and revolves around it in about 24,000 years of our Earth. So the precession that these texts are talking about is not the same one that we typically talk about.
Yeah, and we've talked about that. So the idea of Milankovitch cycles and the Earth is wobbling is probably incorrect. And as far back as the early 90s, when that was my field of study in graduate school, there's a whole group of people that said Milankovitch, his math is right, but what's happening, he's incorrect. The Earth is not wobbling.
Right.
And then sprung out a group of people called the Binary Research Institute, which determined that the star Sirius is potentially in a binary dance with our sun. The problem is when you calculate the periodicity, it's more on the time scale of 75,000 years rather than the precessional number. The problem is we don't know what happens during the binary. And I've discussed this years ago. What if, as we approach our binary star, we accelerate rapidly and whip around each other? That could make the whole concept of calculating the periodicity when we've only been looking at it for a few decades completely incorrect.
Yeah, yeah.
Because our speed now that we're the furthest away could be the slowest, and in like 5,000 years, we could actually be tearing towards Sirius, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah. Which is interesting in and of
itself. It's interesting because of the way they describe the yugas, okay? The yugas are broken up into 4 cycles within the Yuga cycle. You can break it into 4 parts. And each of the parts, as you move through the cycle, it changes, according to many scholars, the general moral and physical characteristics of humanity. And each time we pass a threshold, it decreases it by 1/4 until there's no general moral and physical capacity left, and that would be the bottom of the Yuga.
Right, right. Well, also, just to be clear, the image that's up right now is not the Yuga cycle that we're talking about. Let's get that up there. Here we go. Well, the other thing that's crazy about this is, and we've sort of talked about this in a different context, the idea that we're aware that potentially that we are in a binary star system with Sirius, right? We've talked about how the Dogon knew this, but it turns out also the Vedic philosophers knew this like 8,000 years ago. Which makes perfect sense, because that would mean that half a cycle ago, like during Gobekli Tepe, Sirius would be so close that a group of people in Western Africa called the Dogon could literally see Sirius A and its binary Sirius B and watch the rotation. So that's how they knew it was 8.6 years, because they were watching it. It was much closer. Right now, you cannot see Sirius B from Earth unless you have a very expensive telescope. The other thing that this makes me wonder about, and you can see it in this diagram that we're looking at right now, the different parts of the Yuga cycle, right? So there's the Satya Yuga cycle, the Treta, the Dwapara, and the Kali. The Satya being the golden age, the Kali being the bottom where everything's completely materialistic. But these parts of the cycle have different lengths. They get increasingly long as you go from Kali to Satya. And so it kind of makes me wonder, does this in some way reflect what we were just talking about?
The
Like
speed we're
perhaps,
traveling. Yes, I think
yeah,
it reflects the
right.
speed.
Yeah.
So towards the golden age, we are whipping long distances in this binary system, and it appears probably to extend, or it could be the opposite. We're either going faster or slower, which extends the ages.
Right. 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 Maybe it's that we go slower as we get into the higher ages. But
And
for our audio only listeners, these different sections that we're talking about. So we have a descending cycle where we have a long Satya cycle that's 3,600 years long, and then we have the Treta, which is 2,400 years long, and we're descending now, and then the Dwarpa, which is 2,400 years long. Did I miss something? I'm sorry. 4,800 years for Satya, 3,600 years for Treta, 2,400 for Dwarpa, and then 1,200 for Kali, and then we go into another 1,200-year Kali cycle, but ascending. And then we go into Dwarpa, then Treta, and then Satya. And as we go up, we get more and more advanced. We have greater capacity to understand electricity, magnetism, and then when we get into the Satya era, we have the ability to actually basically comprehend God.
And the exact opposite happens as we reverse.
Right, right.
Now, what I find interesting is that there is extensive evidence to prove this point. The first and foremost piece of evidence, just from looking at this as a layman and knowing what we know, is pretty simple. The worst year on Earth is considered 536 CE. Now, no one knew this when they were creating this. They didn't use this to make that, but we now know 536 is the worst, and it just so happens to be exactly where it's supposed to be.
Right at the bottom.
That's, first of all, is mind-blowing and sends tingles up my spine.
Let me throw a monkey wrench into this, though, because I just realized this morning. Buddha lived, and this is debated, either between 624 and 544 BC, or between 563 and 483 BC. So in the Kali Yuga, in the descending Kali Yuga. So that's pretty interesting.
Which means the Buddha he's so significant because he might be one of the last people that were enlightened from the Dwarpa or the Treta period. He may have held on to that, and so everyone looked at him as like a god. Because at this point in the Kali, the general public is just milling around like a bunch of idiots.
Yeah, well, also somebody else points out that, for example, the Byzantine monasteries occur during the Kali Yuga. And so the suggestion is that the monks who were involved in these monasteries, like they literally sequestered themselves in order to be like removed from the very material, ugly Kali world in order to reach their enlightenment. So maybe that's part of the point of Buddha happening in this time period, that though things are extremely material, that enlightenment can still be sought.
Yeah, so you don't have to be in the correct yuga maybe to have the Godhead. And I think
it's going to be much harder to do that, right?
Absolutely.
To become enlightened that way in that time.
I think this is where the mystery schools came from during the Dwarpa. During the Dwarpa Yuga, during the descending Yuga, these mystery schools existed to teach people about what happens in the Treta and the Satya, the fact that we are descending, and give them access to the Godhead in these mystery schools. So you can still access the knowledge perhaps, but it's very difficult.
Yeah.
Now, the good news is that we've been ascending now for quite some time.
And we are in Dwarpara, in the ascending Dwarpara, in the beginning of it, early in it.
Yeah, very early. You can see this amount of yellow here. So we still have 2,000 years to go before we get to Treta.
Yeah.
Now, here's what you can find interesting. If you start to go look at some evidence for let's find things on different sides here that match up. The advent of dentistry and orthodontics occurred around 1800, the beginning of that. And in a few hundred years now, we've got all kind of advanced dentistry. The same time, around 2000 BC, dentistry was occurring in Egypt, and then they lost the ability. It's
Right.
literally on the exact opposite side of the Yuga cycle here.
Mm-hmm.
So we're now in the computer age, or the electrical age. A lot of the glyphs in Egypt that show the Baghdad battery are estimated to be from 1800 or 2000 BC, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which puts it directly on the opposite side of where we are now.
Yeah. You know what? Let me interject for a second here and just describe or read what Yukteswar, how he describes the different yugas, because it gives a little bit of a sense in terms of the technologies that we're talking about. So for the Kali Yuga, he says that mental virtue or dharma is only a quarter developed. It cannot comprehend anything beyond gross material things. In the Dwapara, the human intellect can comprehend fine matters or electricities or their attributes, which are the creating principles of the external world. So we're starting to understand how the universe works. Treta. In the Treta, the human intellect can comprehend divine magnetism, the source of all electrical forces on which the creation depends for its existence. So we're getting even more evolved in our understanding of how the universe works, and ostensibly the interaction of like the external material world and our consciousness, right? And then in the Satya, that's when we can comprehend God the Spirit beyond the visible world completely. So it's interesting for a couple of reasons. Also because the each half of the Yuga, the 12,000 years of each half, is called the Daiva Yuga, which is also known as the electric couple. And I find this all very interesting because we talk so much about electric universe theory, and we happen to be that happens to be blooming right now in the present time, electric universe theory, which is the Dwapara era, and what's occurring right now.
Yeah. So the cycle you're talking about is half of the whole Yuga, either the descending half or the ascending half, which are each about 12,000. I think that they're closer to 12,500.
That could very well be.
Arguing these dates is moot.
Yeah.
All right, so that we have an interesting scenario happening, but what it also means is that not a lot of change occurs in a single lifetime.
Yes. Yeah, it's not like in your lifetime, people are going to become like tremendously enlightened. It's just not going to happen. But thank God that these time frames are as they are and not as they were misinterpreted to be, because then let's say the Kali Yuga would have lasted between 3102 BC all the way to 428,899 AD. We would be in the Kali Yuga for that long. Right?
A 500,000 year wait to get smarter.
Right. But that information, that interpretation is all over the internet. If you look at like the Wikipedia entry on the Yuga cycle, that's basically what it says. But this is apparently like an old misinterpretation that is just kind of spread all over the place.
Yeah, because they're basing it on, we discussed this, the use of commas and some strange numerology going on with the Hindus that I think confused the whole concept.
I don't think it's the number system that confused it. I think it was, as Yukteswar talks about, that it was basically politically motivated thousands of years ago to interpret it that way.
Now we also looked at a paper on Siddhamthic. The Siddhamthic concept of precession, and they argue that it's not the 26,000 year precessional cycle. It's only 7,200 years.
Yeah.
Which I don't think has any chance of holding water.
Yeah.
Because Milutin Milankovitch did a pure mathematical calculation on the celestial mechanics that you can visibly observe in our solar system, and he calculated precession based on the orbital dynamics of moving bodies.
Yeah.
And nowhere is he going to be off by a factor of 4.
Right.
So 25,800 thereabouts is whatever the precession of the equinoxes is. And we can describe the precession of the equinoxes pretty simply as, if I could find a graphic, as being astrology itself.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to take that one while I look for a picture here?
Well, so
I don't have one.
The starting point.
Oh, here we go, in the center.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, well, this is interesting. Oh, no, this is the great year. This is the Greek version, right?
Right,
Where
and it's rotated. So present day is on the left side here, and the Younger Dryas event would be over here in Leo.
Interesting. So, I mean, this is a different interpretation, right? Where each section of Yuga is the same length. We've got the Bronze Age, an Iron Age, a Gold Age, a Silver Age, and they're all the same length. This is very different than the Yuga cycle concept. In the Yuga cycle concept, the top of the cycle is so in between the ascending Satya and the descending would be right at the first point of Aries. So this is when the autumnal equinox hits the first star in the constellation Aries, which interestingly doesn't match up in any way to the great year cycle that you have here.
No, and I don't know where I got this graphic. It just looked pretty.
If you go to, it's like the 12th or maybe 13th page of Yukteswar's The Holy Science book. He's got a nice diagram that lines up the zodiac. Yeah. So I think it's like maybe page 15 in the PDF. There you go, right there. So at the top there, where you have the transition from Aries to Pisces, that's the beginning. It's the end of the ascending Satya and the beginning of the descending Satya. And so this system uses the autumnal equinox to note those positions, whereas in the Western world we typically use the vernal equinox, which is why right now you would say that we are in the Western world, you'd say that we are probably still in the age of Pisces. I know some people say that we're in the age of Aquarius. But in this system, we are in the age of Leo, or Virgo, rather, I think. Yeah, Virgo.
With Pisces being the opposing sign.
Right, right.
And we still have quite a few hundred years to get to Aquarius.
Yeah, yeah, which would be the argument against being in the age of Aquarius as defined by the Western world.
So the Greeks believe right now, present time, we're headed into the Golden Age now. Whereas the original Hindu, this diagram says that we've got at least, let's say 6,000 or more years before we get into the Golden Age.
Yeah, yeah. Isn't that so interesting that the Greeks kind of took this concept and corrupted it, I guess, into, in my opinion, a much more simplistic.
They simplified it into 6,250 year 4 ages. Yeah.
But also the other thing that doesn't make sense to me about it is that, yeah, they simplified it that way, but they also suggested that we go from the Iron Age right into the Gold Age, which is weird because that system doesn't have ascending and descending. It's like we ascend, and then all of a sudden everything's crap. And then we ascend and ascend, and then, yeah, and then everything's crap. So that's a very different concept than this much more smooth cyclical system.
And also, all of their boundaries fall on astrological boundaries. Here, Sagittarius to Scorpius is the shift from gold to silver. Virgo to Leo is the shift from silver to bronze.
Right.
And Pisces to Aquarius is iron to gold, which...
Oh, I said it backwards. The progression is that we go from gold, everything is amazing, and then we descend all the way down to the Iron Age, and then all of a sudden we go into the golden era again.
Right across this boundary, which is present day. So what day does it shift?
Interesting.
Yeah.
They really bastardized that.
In 2013, we entered the golden age. This is a pretty crappy golden age, I think.
Yeah, no, I will definitely agree with that. I've at times wondered, man, are we really in reality still in the Kali Yuga?
Yeah.
given how things are.
Well, I think that if we were alive 1,500 years ago during the Dark Age, it would suck. So let's not wish that upon us.
Yeah.
Well, also in the Hindu version here, there's only 2 of the astrological boundaries that meet up with a boundary in the Hindu idea.
Yeah.
When we come back, we're going to blow your mind because I think that Gobekli Tepe has a lot to do with this, and that would mean that we've been studying this for tens of years.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. There was blood on the wire. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
The Secret Kindergarten is here for the young children of the world. The best program on the radio for kids, dealing with the most important topics in the whole universe. Fairy tales, music and movement, numbers, plants, animals, fun, colors, insects. Take care and cast your ears out to catch a story from the world of other young things. Reach out, up, under, and over. Sing a song. Talk about feelings. Just remember the magic word. The magic word is no. Step on into the Secret Kindergarten. Saturdays, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Revolution Radio.
Join me on the Brian Ruhe Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. #1 is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. #2 is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. #3, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. #4 is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Ruhe Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at buyer risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And we're back with the second half of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio, #1 listener-supported radio on the internet. So please head over to Revolution.radio, become a Patreon, and support freedom of speech. Now, we've got a lot to talk about here. We barely touched we barely even glossed over the surface. In the first half hour was basically an introduction to what different concepts of the Yuga cycle. So that's kind of mind-blowing. And before we go any further, I'd like to read Randall Carlson's quote here. And this is in reference to the Yuga cycle. And he says, a cosmic tempo based on sacred geometry, encoded in myth and mystical architecture throughout the earth, governs the unfolding of world ages, the rise and fall of civilization, and is ultimately the very basis of apocalyptic prophecy. Pretty mind-blowing. And that brings us to the great year, which Randall Carlson has created this graphic, which kind of incorporates the Hindu philosophy, the Greek philosophy, astrological philosophy in the center, and it lays it all on what is commonly known as the precession of the equinoxes, which is, they're using 26,000 here. And interestingly enough, you could see all the green dots.
Yeah.
These are all major geologic events or catastrophes that occurred that would literally be civilization ending. And they all seem to happen on these certain flexure points here on this iron cross.
I wonder where those flexure points would line up on the Yuga cycle.
Well, we're currently directly here on this catastrophe.
Yeah.
Which is exactly 26,000 years ago, was the onset of the last ice age. And now clearly 26,000 years later, it's over. So guess what happens on this flexure point? The next ice age.
So this is right on the, it's also right on the shift between Aquarius and Pisces.
But not Kali and Dwarpa.
No, it doesn't line up with the Yuga cycle demarcations.
Let me see if I can put these side by side here before we get to that.
Yeah. By the way, I suddenly realized, I didn't know why I didn't think about this earlier, but in the descending Kali period is also the time of Jesus. And
yeah, well, let's go over that real quick here. The data set they have in this paper. They have a really nice data set here.
Yeah.
This is the Dwarpa. So the Treta, this is when we're a little higher up in here towards the Golden Age. And as we're dropping down to the Silver and the Bronze and the Iron Age here, which is the Dark Age, they literally have lists of what goes on. The Minoan Empire, no one can really explain because for a number of reasons. They were much more enlightened than we are. So they have this wonderful art and megalithic construction, but it's just like they came out of nowhere. No one knows who they are or where they came from. All of a sudden, there's like nothing, and then there's Minoans. A lot of people say the Minoans came from the Atlanteans, but there's this 7,000 year gap until they show up. So where were they?
Well, that's interesting too, because this same article with this diagram out of Ananda College talks about that there's a reason why we don't find a lot of evidence of high civilization in the Treta period, because it was more of a mental age. That there wasn't this need to, make these big megalithic buildings or whatever, because the emphasis was on everything mental, that it would be found in myths and oral traditions and things that would have been passed down, things that are apparently lost to us. I don't know if I agree with that concept. Maybe we're just missing archaeological relics in this time period. Because it would
also put the dates of the Great Pyramids, the way they date them, in the Dwarpa.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But they could have been built in the Dwarpa prior to this, which would be probably 20,000 years ago or so.
Or in the Treta.
If in fact there was things being built in the Treta, which we know because of Gobekli Tepe.
Right. Right.
Now, what I find interesting is that all of these different philosophies from different civilizations all start to line up.
Yeah.
The Mayan calendar and Mexico's sunstone align perfectly with the Hindu yugas.
That's perfect. Absolutely.
The fifth sun,
perfect.
the fourth sun, and take a look at the length of their ages. They follow the same growing length.
Yep.
It's completely mind-boggling.
Yeah, that's
How
amazing.
did the Mesoamericans know about some type of science that was developed over tens of thousands of years, if not longer?
Yeah.
And guess when the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl emerges?
I don't know.
536. In this case, 499 CE, the bottom. Within
very
1
bottom.
year of the bottom.
Oh, this actually says 499.
Right there.
Wow, which is exactly the date from the Vedic text. That's the date.
Absolutely mind-blowing.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. And you and I talked about yesterday that, it's not so much that, okay, so if we look at like Gobekli Tepe and the Younger Dryas, which would be occurring right in the descending, first part of the descending Satya period, it's not that you can't have catastrophes during these high periods. It's as if events happen in various parts of the cycle in order to clear the decks for something new, right? And in the case of Gobekli Tepe's existence, that is in the descending Satya cycle. So it's almost like we have to start getting rid of these amazing things that have been created because we're going into the descent. Like we have to lose them. Like
That is
we have
interesting.
to lose these things so we can learn them all over again.
Yeah, because right in the middle of the Dwarpa here, as the Minoan culture is flourishing and peaks, Santorini erupts and everyone dies.
Yeah, right.
So catastrophes do happen in the middle of these ages.
Right. So it's not to suggest that there's like specific moments for catastrophes to happen, but perhaps they happen in order to aid the purpose of this cycle. And then, of course, this is really interesting too, that there may be correlation with Gobekli Tepe.
Yeah, so here's an aerial view of just some of 1, 2, 3, 4, let's say 4 enclosures that they've started. This is the main enclosure D, which is completely excavated, that's famous now and has a roof on it. And I even looked over here at this unknown enclosure that there's no other pictures of it but here, and now it's covered up and they don't have any info. But there are 12 pillars in here surrounding the oval, as well as 12 in enclosure D. What I find most amazing, and I said last night that the vulture stone was the head of the oval. It's not.
Yeah.
There is a stone laying opposite of the others, which are like spokes in a wheel, with a sighting hole through it. So that sighting hole from the center platform here is probably looking at that star in Aries to begin the golden age, which is what is it called? The leg of Dharma?
It's the seat of Brahma.
Seat of Brahma.
Yeah. Also known as something else that I wrote down earlier. Vishnu Nabi is the seat of Brahma, right? So Brahma regulates the mental virtue. Brahma is basically God, right? It's what underlies the nature of everything. But this is interesting, especially interesting too, because I think there's something very similar at Karahan Tepe, where there's a hole.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it's positioned exactly in the enclosure at Karahan Tepe, but
the dude's head is on the north side. If this was the enclosure at Karahan Tepe, there's a head here by the sighting stone. And then instead of pillars on the perimeter, there's these long phallic-like or anthropomorph people in the center. So that's the difference.
Yeah. So what if each of these, oh, wow. Well, that's interesting too. The vulture. So pillar 43 is, let's say we were going to line this up with the Yuga cycle, then pillar 43 would actually be in the ascending Satya cycle. Now, we've talked about pillar 43 potentially demarcating the Younger Dryas period and the Younger Dryas event, which would not line up here, right? Because the Younger Dryas event would actually be occurring in the descending Satya. So that's
right.
Interesting.
This is 12,800 right here. So it's at the very beginning of the descending Satya.
Yeah.
The beginning of the Younger Dryas, meaning the event. Gobekli Tepe was built here at the end of the Younger Dryas, 11,600 years ago.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
after the cold period, when the event was over, they were making these stone circles to signify the event. Quran Tepe was made closer to the event.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
12,000 plus years ago. And so within that short period of 1,000 years, they got this good.
So perhaps the Pillar 43, the Vulture Stone, perhaps that is actually demarcating some other event that we're not aware of. And I mean, what if all of these circular enclosures are marking some kind of significant event within the Yuga cycle? That would be really interesting.
Well, yeah. And if this is corresponding to the ascending part, and this is the top of the Yuga here, the sighting stone, this could be the bowling Alarad warming.
I wondered about that.
Where this impactor that eventually hits 12,008 or 9 initially comes in. We've studied it. There's a platinum spike at 15,000 years ago, and then one at like 14, which would suggest that this is when the comet entered the picture. If the vulture is holding the comet and it's not the sun,
Right.
the comet may have come in at this point in the Yuga and didn't hit until over here near Pillar 30. What's on Pillar 30? Let's go find it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want to know if that whole sighting stone, if that really looks on Aries. That would be really interesting.
And so who are the two guys that did the regression archaeoastronomy? Sweatman?
Sweatman and Sitricus did the archaeoastronomy for this Pillar 43. And what they, just as a reminder to our listeners, they conclude basically that the circle in the middle of Pillar 43 held by the vulture is the sun. And it's saying that the sun was essentially near a part of Sagittarius in this period, and that the three arcs at the top of the pillar denote the position of the equinoxes and solar and the equinoxes and solstices, thank you, for a particular year as demarcated by the little animals that appear next to them. Maybe that, it could very well be that that's not correct, but they could do the wind back, the archaeoastronomy wind back and determine whether or not that hole would really line up with Aries, especially when Gobekli Tepe was built. And it may
and
still.
I watched the podcast on the paper where someone says that one of the two, Sweatman or Sitricus, said that this could also possibly represent the comet and the stuff behind. Oh no, they say that these pieces here, see these squares?
Yeah.
These are the fragmented comet that came by. This is all the plasma coming off of it. And then the decapitated head at the bottom here represents the death associated with it.
Yeah, that's somebody else. That's not Sweatman and Sitricus,
but these pictographs here, like the scorpion and the bird, Cygnus, all line up with constellations in the sky. They overlaid them, so it is very compelling.
I mean, it is and it isn't, right? I mean, there's still a lot of wiggle room for interpretation, especially considering that you have to consider that people 12,000 years ago are not necessarily interpreting asterisms in the sky in the same way we are today. And they definitely took that into account when they did this. They looked at the animals and where they would line up in the sky and you could make that animal out of these stars over here. But that's very, very subjective. I find that the arcs at the top of the pillar are fairly compelling, but again, it depends on how you interpret the asterisms related to the animals next to the little arcs. So,
and then if we start to think about mythology, all kinds of things start coming up here. How all these cultures are related all over the world with some kind of known science that came from no one knows. We also don't know where astrology came from, yet it's been around forever, and it matches up with everything.
Well, and I also think that has to be taken in consideration. Like what I just said about, the astrums don't necessarily line up with what we look at in the sky as to what we were doing 12,000 years ago. Well, it could also be that the opposite is true, right? That we've had some kind of continuous astrological recognition of certain asterisms in the sky that we've been carrying through for thousands of years.
Yeah, and I think the whole story of Jesus, the Son of God, and his 12 disciples is nothing more than astrology. And it's nothing more than this circle right here. It's nothing more than the great year. it's so bizarre.
Yeah.
That people take it that literally when you have evidence like this. I can see the 12 disciples here surrounding this enclosure.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and obviously this number 12, I mean, we've been carrying this around with us for thousands and thousands of years. It's the reason why we still have 12 months in the year, you know?
Well,
And
I would
then-
argue we should have 13. If we have 13 months, every month is 28 days. Every month starts on Monday and ends on Sunday, and everyone knows exactly what time it is.
Well, and some astrologists would argue the same thing. Some astrologists say that we should incorporate Ophiuchus in the astrology, giving us 13 demarcating constellations along the ecliptic instead of 12. I think that's debatable, but...
Right, and if the ancients 11,500 years ago were using 12, then there's probably something to that.
Well, and I would imagine that a lot of this is like you said, it should be 13 months, which would give us 28 days for the month, but this is probably a function of a year on Earth that has changed somewhat, right? Like it's quite possible that our year on Earth has actually lengthened a little bit, which is why it doesn't line up evenly with 12 months.
Yeah, that's true. But from what we know now, the day increases and decreases in a cycle. So I don't know if it's linearly going one direction.
Oh, no, I'm not suggesting that it is. I'm just saying that that it can probably change and shift. It could probably get shorter, longer, whatever. So this is probably some of the reason for the discrepancy why 12 doesn't always match.
So we've only got 10 minutes to wrap this up. The big question is, what is the mechanism causing this great year, this Yuga cycle, this ascending and descending cycle of humanity? We're using our brain about 30%, maybe a little bit more right now. We're ascending. So that should increase for the next 6,000 years until the full brain is being used. Mm-hmm. So does that mean if we were alive in 536 with the right equipment, we would only have been using 15% of our brain?
I was just thinking that perhaps the reason why, like, the Buddha is alive in the bottom of the descending Kali Yuga, as well as Jesus, I mean, maybe the reason for that is to remind us of human beings of our capability to be enlightened. I mean, these are obviously extraordinary figures in history, unlike most everybody else. So perhaps, you know, in the Satya Yuga, perhaps we're all Buddhas and Jesuses. Right. And that we just need that reminder in this dark period that that's ultimately our goal, to reach some state of enlightenment, both personally and as a civilization. Like that we should always be striving for that in our lifetimes, that we shouldn't just throw that away because the world is a disaster.
Right. And that brings into question what many people have postulated. Up in the top here, in the golden age, there are many conspiracy theorists and speculators for decades that have claimed aliens arrived at the top here and helped us out. Mm. What if they were just other people like us living in a Sirius binary, and this period is when Sirius is close and they can come to Earth and help us out?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of said this before, but I often feel like the alien hypotheses are, it's kind of a cop-out. It's like saying that as human beings that we're not capable of being really enlightened and really advanced, that we're underselling ourselves all the time. And human beings do this to themselves constantly, to like guilt themselves and bring themselves down. That's a regular feature of being human, that we all should work in the opposite direction, right? And so I don't see why we need aliens to explain anything as long as we believe in our own capabilities.
True. And based on the panspermia idea that we've discussed, we are aliens already.
So. Right. We're already all children of the cosmos, and as anything else is. And I love this idea that, you know, perhaps we're approaching Sirius as we approach the Satya Yuga, right? Because it's as if that extra star energy, it's as if that is what really wakes us up and opens our abilities and opens all of our chakras, you know?
Yeah, it's the vibration when the planets get close that maybe is the perfect harmony and where we should be on, you know, it's the perfect time on Earth when the planets are in close proximity. But if we then go back to electric universe, if this is some kind of thing happening on a cycle, maybe the Saturn myth is a little polluted, and some of the planetary discharges occur in these closer times with Sirius, because Sirius has other bodies that are rotating around it that maybe some of them we can't see. And they bring these objects near our solar system and bad things happen.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, what's very fascinating is the fact that these geologic catastrophes happen on this flexure point, which is not at the top of the Yuga. It is, slightly on the descending, and these happen slightly on the ascending.
Well, I don't know about that, because if you line up the Yuga cycle with that, right? Okay, so in that bottom triangle there, that's the whole age of Aquarius, which is west. I believe that's probably vernal equinox Aquarius, which would put us in Leo on the Yuga cycle, which would really be I don't know if maybe I've got this all mixed up here, but yeah, that would put us in Leo.
Here. So the line on modern day, would be, aren't they showing Pisces? Is this Pisces to Aquarius?
Yeah, we're in Pisces / Aquarius.
Okay.
Right.
That's on the opposite of this graph right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
From here. That's today.
Right. Well, so what I'm suggesting is that the lines on the the lines here on the Iron Cross, like, maybe should be shifted so that, like, that line of geological events maybe should be straight up and down.
Well, it's referring
to line up
line.
with where we are right now.
It's referring to where we're lining up right now.
Right.
But in other words, I'm trying to say that these catastrophes don't happen on the major flexure points of the Yuga. They happen on the flexure points of the astrological chart.
Maybe. Yeah, could very well be. Yeah. So
they're not that exact. They're plus or minus a few hundred years, but they're falling close.
So this would, so that we enter Leo in 2499. We enter Aquarius Leo, I should say, in 2499. So you could maybe suggest that is when the geological catastrophes happen.
Yeah, right here.
Mm-hmm.
Which would be the same as Pisces Aquarius, which is what this is showing here.
Right.
So we got a little bit more time before the Earth blows up.
We got some time to prepare. And most of us, well, not most of us, all of us will not be alive unless we find some ability to extend our lives dramatically. That's a long time away.
Yeah. The concept of as above, so below may not necessarily mean that the precession of the equinoxes is our solar system traveling above and below the ecliptic in the Milky Way. It might have, or it might be happening as a result of the binary interaction with Sirius.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that next week we should talk about the initial work. I mean, this is decades old now, that the Binary Research Institute did on talk about the mythology and how it's impossible that the Dogon knew what they knew. It was so impossible that people said that, oh, no, Europeans came in and gave them these secret answers years before. I mean, it's so stupid, the way they explained it. Because none of the Dogon even knew English. Like, how would you come there and tell them this?
Right. But also the lie, it shows up again with this concept that all progress is linear, right? Like we were talking about this yesterday, the discoveries, let's say, that we made in the 17th century about the nature of matter. Well, all of that had already been figured out before. It's just that we forgot it all. And then we rediscovered it and we pretended that we were learning it for the first time. Well, it's like, if you don't realize that, then you cannot accept the idea that some people like the Dogon may have received some information long ago that they carried through their culture, and that the rest of us just forgot, and Dogon are the ones who didn't forget.
Yeah, they only had to remember for about 8,000 years to get them here. If Sirius was that close 8,000 years ago, they could have observed it, witnessed it. It could have been part of their tradition, their dances. This is our new sun or whatever.
But maybe also on some level, maybe we are meant to forget. So maybe we are meant to forget some of this. Maybe this is why Gobekli Tepe was buried, right? Maybe it's not because of an oncoming catastrophe, but we're supposed to forget this stuff and relearn it all over again, right? Because there's no end to the Enlightenment process.
Now the cycle continues. Thanks for listening.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.